I was adjusting another woman's coat, whispering something that made her laugh, while his pregnant wife lay bleeding alone on a gurney 30 feet away. That's not a rumor. That's not a misunderstanding. That happened. Amara Nwosu had called her husband 23 times that night. 23 times. And every single call went to voicemail while Cassian Kang, the most feared mafia boss in East Asia, a man who could move mountains with one phone call, stood in a VIP clinic adjusting his assistant's scarf like she was made of glass. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds in that hospital corridor. 2 seconds that ended a marriage, buried a child, and changed 2 lives forever. If that had been you on that gurney, 7 months pregnant, bleeding, alone, calling the one person who promised to always come, what would you have done? Before we go further, if stories like this one keep you up at night, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night everything broke. The storm came without warning that Tuesday evening, the way the worst things in life always do. Amara had spent most of the day on her feet, not because anyone asked her to, but because sitting still had become impossible somewhere around her 6th month. She was that kind of woman, the kind who reorganized the kitchen cabinets at midnight because her mind wouldn't quiet down, the kind who answered work emails from her hospital bed after a 12-hour shift because 3 of her patients were preterm and she couldn't stop thinking about their charts. Her colleagues called it dedication. Her mother called it stubbornness. Cassian used to call it the thing he loved most about her, back when he still said things like that out loud. She was 34 years old, a pediatric surgeon with a reputation that had followed her from Lagos to London to Seoul. She had steady hands in an operating room and a laugh that filled whatever room she walked into. She was also 7 months pregnant, exhausted in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix, and more alone in her marriage than she had ever admitted to anyone, including herself. The mansion Cassian had built for them sat at the edge of a private hillside in northern Seoul, surrounded by manicured grounds that Amara had never asked for, and security cameras that watched every entrance except, apparently, the one that mattered. The door inside her own home that her husband walked through less and less each month. She told herself it was the business. That was always the answer when she tried to think about it rationally. Cassian's empire was complicated. She had known that when she married him. She had walked into that life with both eyes open, or at least she believed she had, which is not the same thing at all. What she hadn't calculated, what no woman ever calculates, no matter how intelligent she is, was how slowly the distance would grow. Not in dramatic arguments or cold silences, but in small things. A dinner canceled, a weekend trip postponed, a phone left face down on the nightstand. None of it was enough to call a crisis. All of it together was quietly devastating. That evening she had eaten alone, standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the long dining table felt theatrical in its emptiness. She'd had half a bowl of rice, some soup she couldn't remember tasting, and a glass of water. The baby had been restless all day. Not the usual rolling and shifting she'd grown accustomed to, but something more urgent, more insistent, like a knock that kept getting louder. She put her bowl in the sink and pressed both hands flat against her belly, the way she always did when the movement startled her. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. We're okay." She said it mostly to convince herself. The pain started around 9:15, not the cramping she'd experienced before, the kind her OB had told her was normal, the kind she'd documented dutifully in her pregnancy journal with the dates and durations and pain levels circled in red pen, because she was a surgeon and surgeons document everything. This was different. This was the kind of pain that rewrites the sentence you were in the middle of. It started deep and spread fast, and within 60 seconds she was gripping the kitchen counter with both hands, breathing through her teeth. She told herself, "Wait. Give it a minute. Don't panic." Then she felt the warmth spreading down her leg and looked down, and the part of her brain that was a surgeon immediately understood what the rest of her wasn't ready to accept. She grabbed her phone off the counter and called Cassian. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called again, same result. "Cassian." Her voice on the 3rd attempt was steadier than she felt, because she had spent 10 years training herself not to let fear come through in her voice during emergencies. "I need you to call me back right now. Something is wrong, please." She left the message, set the phone on the counter, and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she taught her patients' mothers to breathe. The pain doubled. She called again. And again. The voicemail greeting played 6 times in a row. His voice, composed and professional. "You've reached Cashin Kang. Leave a message." While she slid down the kitchen cabinet until she was sitting on the cold marble floor, one hand pressed against her abdomen and the other holding the phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She called her housekeeper. No answer. The woman had gone home 2 hours ago. She called their driver, Park Sessi, who picked up on the third ring sounding groggy and apologetic and said he could be there in 40 minutes. She told him she didn't have 40 minutes. She told him she was going to drive herself and asked him to meet her at the hospital. He started to argue. She had already hung up. Getting to the car was the part she never talked about afterward, in the years when people asked her to tell the story. Not because she couldn't remember it. She remembered every second with the clinical precision of a trauma response, but because it was too private. The way she crawled more than walked down the hallway. The way she stopped twice against the wall, pressing her forehead to the cool plaster, reminding herself of every emergency obstetric case she'd ever assisted on. Telling herself what she would tell a patient. "You can do this. People survive this. Keep moving." She made it to the car. She drove 40 minutes on rain-slicked highway, one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed against herself as if pressure could hold things in place. And she did not cry once because she was afraid if she started, she wouldn't be able to see the road. She called Cashin 6 more times on the way. She counted. Every call went to voicemail. She pulled up to the hospital's emergency entrance at 10:47 p.m., put the car in park, and the moment she opened the door and stood up, her legs buckled. A security guard caught her. She told him she was a doctor, she was pregnant, she was bleeding, and she needed obstetric emergency right now. He radioed inside before she'd finished the sentence. The next few minutes were a controlled blur, the kind that medical training creates, where your mind logs information without fully processing it. A gurney appeared. Voices overlapped. Someone cut the sleeve of her shirt to get to her arm. Someone else was asking her questions she answered automatically. Gestational age, blood type, previous complications, allergies. She answered all of them correctly. She was still answering when they pushed the gurney through a set of swinging doors. The corridor they moved through connected the emergency intake to the obstetric wing. Amara knew this hospital. She had privileges here. She had walked this exact corridor dozens of times in the past 2 years. She saw the VIP clinic entrance on her left as they rounded the corner. She saw him before he saw her. Cassian was standing near the reception desk. He was still in his suit, the charcoal one she recognized, the one he'd put on that morning. His jacket was slightly rumpled. His tie was loosened. He had one hand pressed to the small of Celine Park's back, and the other was holding her coat open so she could slip her arms into it. And Celine was saying something that made him tilt his head and almost smile. And a nurse nearby was telling them both, cheerfully, that the influenza was very mild and she'd be completely fine with rest and fluids. Cashin was nodding at the nurse, but his attention was on Celine. He was adjusting the lapel of her coat the way you adjust something you have touched 1,000 times and know by heart. The gurney kept moving. Amara couldn't have stopped it if she tried, and she wasn't sure she would have tried. What she could do, what she did, was turn her head in his direction for exactly as long as it took for their eyes to meet. 1 second, maybe 2. She saw the exact moment he recognized her. His face went wrong in a way she had never seen before. His hands dropped from Celine's coat. His mouth opened. She looked away. She kept her eyes on the ceiling tiles for the rest of the corridor, counting the fluorescent lights the way she used to count heartbeats in surgery when she needed to stay inside herself. And she made a decision in the space between one light and the next that was so quiet and so complete that it didn't even feel like a decision. It felt like a door closing. She was wheeled into the operating room at 11:03. Cassian had not called her back once in the 2 hours and 14 minutes since she first dialed his number. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. She knew this because she asked the nurse the moment she could form words again. And the nurse told her gently, the way nurses tell you things when the answer is not the only bad thing they have to say. The team had been extraordinary. She would think about that later. Think about it with the professional clarity she could never fully switch off. The speed of the interventions, the decisions made under pressure, the hands that worked to keep her alive. She would think about sending each of them a letter. She woke up and the room was pale and quiet and smelled like antiseptic and something else she couldn't name. There were monitors on both sides of her bed. Her mouth was dry. Her left arm was attached to two IV lines. The light coming through the window was early morning gray. She was alone. She knew before anyone told her. The way the silence sat in the room. The particular quality of the stillness. She had been present in too many rooms like this one. Rooms where something irreversible had happened and everyone outside the door was waiting to see how the person inside was going to receive it. She had sat on the other side of that door. She knew exactly what it meant. She stared at the ceiling and did not move for a long time. When the doctor came in, a woman she didn't know, younger than her, with careful eyes, she delivered the information gently and completely. Placental abruption, rapid blood loss. Every possible intervention had been attempted. Amara had survived. The baby had not. Amara listened. She nodded in the places where nodding was appropriate. She asked two clinical questions, not because the answers would change anything, but because the act of asking them kept her anchored inside her body, which felt like a critical thing to be right now. The doctor sat with her for a while. Amara thanked her. The doctor left. The room went quiet again. Amara lay there in the gray morning light with her hands folded across her abdomen, still instinctively, the way the body doesn't immediately believe what the mind has been told, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not grief exactly. Not yet. That was coming, and she knew it, and she was not ready for it, and there was nothing she could do to prepare. What she felt first, in those first raw minutes, was a clarity so sharp it was almost physical. She had called 23 times. Not once had he picked up. And she had found him not working, not in danger, not unconscious or unreachable, but standing in the VIP corridor of the same hospital she'd been wheeled through bleeding, holding another woman's coat open, making sure she was comfortable. She had replayed that image 3 times during the surgery prep, in the moments between the anesthesiologist's instructions, the way your mind seizes on the wrong thing when there's nothing else it can control. She had replayed it again when she first woke up. She was replaying it now. She pulled the blanket up with one hand and turned her face toward the window. Whatever this marriage had been, whatever she had told herself it was over. Not because of a single bad night, not because of one mistake, but because the image of Cassian adjusting Celine's coat, while Amara bled alone in her car, and then in a hospital hallway, and then in an operating room had collapsed every self-protective story she had been quietly telling herself for the past 2 years. She hadn't let herself see it before. She was seeing it now. The door opened. Cassian walked in. He had changed his shirt. She noticed that immediately, the way she noticed irrelevant details when she was protecting herself. And his face looked like he hadn't slept, and his eyes went straight to hers with an expression she couldn't quite name. Not guilt, exactly. Something adjacent to it, something that needed a response from her to complete itself. She didn't give him one. Amara. His voice was lower than usual. She looked at him. She waited. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you, I didn't know how serious. You didn't pick up. The 3 words landed flat. Not accusatory, just factual. He moved closer, stopped a few feet from the bed. Celine collapsed at the office. I thought she had influenza. Amara said it without heat. Seasonal influenza. The nurse said so. I heard her. Cassian's jaw tightened. I didn't know that yet, not until… You didn't pick up the phone, Cassian. She said it again, still in the same tone. 23 times. I counted. He stood there. He had never been a man who ran out of things to say. She had always admired that about him. The steadiness, the composure, the way he could hold a room just by being in it. Right now he was standing at the foot of her hospital bed with nothing in his hands and nothing on his face, except something that looked, for the first time in the years she had known him, like genuine helplessness. She looked away. She looked out the window at the gray morning that was slowly becoming a pale yellow morning, and she thought about her mother's voice on the phone 3 weeks ago, saying, I worry about you up there, Amara. Are you really all right? And she thought about the baby. Not in abstract terms, not in medical terms, but in the terms that her body understood, the weight and warmth and particular intimacy of the months they had spent together before either of them had a chance. She did not cry. Not in front of him. Not yet. You should go, she said. Amara, I'm asking you to go, Cassian. She turned back to look at him, and her eyes were steady. Not cold, just decided. Please. He stood there for another moment, long enough that she thought he might actually stay, might actually push back. And she didn't know if she had the energy to hold this boundary with everything else she was holding right now. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft, ordinary click. Amara exhaled slowly. She pressed the call button for the nurse, and when the nurse came in, she asked for a pen, a piece of paper, and the name of the hospital's patient advocacy office. She had some paperwork to begin. The pen the nurse brought her was a cheap ballpoint, the kind that skips on the first stroke. Amara pressed it against the paper 3 times before the ink caught, and even that small, stupid friction felt like a metaphor she didn't have the energy to examine. She wrote one line. I would like to speak with someone about initiating discharge paperwork and a referral to patient legal services. She folded the paper in half, handed it to the nurse, and asked for water. The nurse, young, maybe 26, with the kind of careful face that people develop when they work in rooms where bad things happen, took the paper without reading it and said she'd be back in a few minutes. She was back in 4. She brought the water, a small cup of ice chips, and a look that communicated everything she'd been trained not to say out loud. Amara thanked her, drank the water, set the cup on the tray beside her bed with a steadiness that surprised even her. Then she lay back and let herself think, which was the thing she had been holding off on since the moment she'd opened her eyes in this room. She thought about the drive to the hospital, the rain on the windshield and the way she had gripped the steering wheel with both hands, even though one hand was supposed to stay pressed against her abdomen, and she had compromised, alternating, telling herself, just get there, just get there, just get there, like a mantra that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with the mechanical necessity of forward motion. She thought about the security guard who caught her when her legs gave out. She thought about the fluorescent lights in the corridor. She thought about those 2 seconds of eye contact. The way Cassian's hands had gone still on Celine's coat. The way his face had done that thing she'd never seen it do before. The particular collapse of a man who has been caught not in a lie exactly, but in a truth he hadn't planned to let her see. She thought about her baby. She stopped thinking about her baby. Not because she couldn't bear it. She could. She would. That grief was already inside her like a stone dropped in deep water, still sinking, but because if she went there right now, she would come apart in a way that she could not afford to come apart in. Not yet. Not here. Not in this hospital bed with the IV still in her arm and Cassian's footsteps probably still echoing down the hallway outside. She picked up her phone from the bedside tray. The screen lit up. 41 unread messages. 12 missed calls, all from the last 3 hours, most of them from Cassian. 2 from her colleague, Dr. Bay. 1 from her mother, time-stamped 4:17 a.m., which meant someone had called her mother, and she did not know who, and she was not ready for that conversation yet. She put the phone face down. She stared at the ceiling. The lawyer arrived at 9:30. His name was Min Jae Won. She'd asked specifically for a hospital-affiliated family law contact, not Cassian's people, not anyone connected to the Kong network, which stretched through half the legal firms in Seoul like roots through old concrete. Min was 40-something, slightly rumpled, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the direct manner of someone who had sat in rooms like this one enough times to skip the unnecessary softness. He sat down, opened his briefcase, and said, "Do you want me to tell you your options, or do you already know what you want?" She liked him immediately. "I know what I want," she said. "I want to file for divorce. No contested assets. I'm not asking for property or money or anything connected to his business. I want my medical license, my personal accounts, my personal belongings, and I want it done quickly and quietly." Mine looked at her over his reading glasses. "Cassian Kong is your husband." "I'm aware." "His lawyers will do whatever he tells them to do," she said. "And if he tries to contest this, I will make the circumstances of last night very public and very detailed. But I don't think he will. I think he knows what he did." Min was quiet for a moment. He wrote something on his notepad. "You're sure about the assets?" "I'm a surgeon with a salary," she said. "I don't need his money. I never needed his money." He nodded slowly, wrote something else, and then looked up at her with the same careful eyes the nurse had. "I'm sorry about what happened." "Thank you," she said. "How soon can we begin?" Cassian did not go home. He went to the hospital's 4th-floor family consultation room, A beige, airless room with 3 chairs and a water dispenser that made a sound like it was clearing its throat. And he sat down and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and stayed like that for a long time. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. It was a message from Celine. "I heard what happened. Is Amara all right? Please tell me she's okay." He stared at the message. He typed back, "Don't contact me today." He sent it. Put the phone face down on the chair beside him. Stood up, sat back down. He was a man who had run a criminal empire since the age of 27. He had sat across tables from people who wanted him dead and eaten his meal without his hand trembling. He had made decisions that destroyed businesses, ended careers, redirected the flow of money through half the underground networks of East Asia. And he had done all of it with the specific quality of cold that his grandfather had trained into him from the time he was old enough to understand what the family business actually was. He was not cold right now. He was sitting in a beige consultation room on the 4th floor of a hospital, and he felt like a man who had walked off the edge of something in the dark and only just now hit the ground. He had not known. That was the thing he kept returning to, the sentence he kept rebuilding in his head, testing its weight. He had not known how serious it was. When his phone lit up with Amara's calls, he had seen them. He admitted that now in the privacy of his own skull. He had seen the first 3 in real time. He had assumed it was the same thing it had been the last several times she'd called during a work emergency. Something manageable, something that could wait 20 minutes while he dealt with Celine, who had been shaking and pale in the office corridor and whose blood pressure reading had alarmed his personal security medic enough to insist on the hospital visit. He had believed the medic. He had believed it was serious. He pulled out his phone and called the medic now. The man picked up on the second ring. "The reading you gave me last night," Cassian said. "Celine's blood pressure, what was the number?" Silence on the other end. The specific silence of someone deciding something. "I need you to tell me the exact number you read. Mr. Kang, the number." More silence. Then carefully, 140/92. Cassian knew blood pressure. He wasn't a doctor, but he was a man who employed a lot of people and paid attention to things. 140/92. Elevated. Not an emergency. Consistent with stress and a fever. Consistent, exactly, with mild seasonal influenza in a person who was anxious and slightly dramatic about her health. "Why did you tell me she might be in serious danger?" His voice was level. The cold was coming back. The automatic cold. The trained response. Another silence. This one longer. "She said she felt like she was going to—" "She told you what to say." He didn't say it like a question. He said it the way he said things he already understood. The medic did not answer. The silence was its own answer. Cassian ended the call. He sat in the beige room for another minute, completely still, the way he went still when his mind was moving fast. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket out of habit, and walked back toward the elevator. He needed to see Amara. The duty nurse outside her room stopped him, politely, professionally, with the kind of immovable courtesy that people learn when they're regularly blocking people who have more power than them from doing things that aren't in the patient's best interest. "Mrs. Kang has requested no visitors at this time." "I'm her husband." "Yes, Mr. Kang." She was specific. He looked at the nurse. The nurse looked back at him. She was 60, maybe 65, with the gray-streaked hair of someone who had stood in this exact position, in this exact hallway, more times than she could count, and she was not afraid of him. That was plain. She was just doing her job, which right now was to keep him out of his wife's room. He stepped back. "Tell her I'm here," he said. "Tell her I'll wait." "I'll pass that along," the nurse said, in the tone that meant she would pass it along, and whatever Amara said in response was not going to be delivered back to him. He went to the waiting room down the hall. He sat. He waited. His grandmother called. He let it go to voicemail. His second-in-command sent a message about a shipment issue that would normally require his immediate response. He forwarded it to his deputy without reading the details. Celine called. He declined it. She called again. He turned his phone to silent. It was his mother who showed up at 11:30. Young-soo Yeon arrived the way she always arrived, precisely, efficiently, dressed like a woman attending a board meeting rather than a family crisis, her posture carrying the particular uprightness of someone who has always confused control with competence. She was 61 years old. She had been managing the social machinery of the Kang family since before Cassian was born. She sat down across from him in the waiting room and looked at him with the assessing expression he had grown up interpreting as love. "How is she?" his mother asked. "The baby didn't survive." His mother's face moved in a way that was difficult to read. "I'm sorry," she said. She sounded like she meant it, and the terrible thing was that she probably did, in whatever capacity her heart had for meaning things that didn't also serve a purpose. "She's asking for a divorce," he said. His mother was quiet. "She's already talked to a lawyer, this morning." He looked at his mother directly. "She's not asking for anything. No money, no property. She just wants out." "Then let the lawyers handle, why was I not reachable last night?" His mother blinked. "You were with Celine. My phone had 3 missed calls from Amara before I silenced it," he said. "I silenced it because Celine was upset and I didn't want the interruption. I made that choice." He paused. "Let that land." But Celine's blood pressure reading was 140/92. The medic called it an emergency. He doesn't do that on his own. His mother's hands, folded in her lap, tightened slightly. A small thing. He noticed small things. He had been trained by her to notice small things. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm not suggesting anything yet," he said. "I'm collecting information." She held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away toward the window. "What matters right now is keeping this quiet. A divorce will attract attention. The Kong name—" "Don't," he said. She stopped. "Don't talk to me about the name right now." His voice dropped, not in volume, but in temperature. "My wife was bleeding in a car alone at night, calling me 23 times, and I didn't pick up. My child is dead. Do not sit here and talk to me about the name." His mother said nothing. She looked at her hands in her lap. Her jaw was tight. "Go home," he said. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and left without another word. Her heels clicked down the hallway with perfect spacing, precise as a metronome, and then the elevator arrived and took her away, and the waiting room was quiet again. Cassian sat there and thought about his medic's voice, the silence in it, the specific weight of a man deciding what he's willing to say. Amara was discharged on the 3rd day. Not because she was fully recovered, she wasn't, not even close, and she knew it, but because staying in that hospital one more night felt like something she couldn't do. Not with Cassian's messages piling up on her phone. Not with the nurses looking at her with those eyes. Not with the particular smell of the room that she had cataloged and filed in the part of her memory that was going to take years to process. She had Min Jae-won's card in her wallet. She had signed the initial divorce paperwork that morning, her signature steady, pressed into the paper with a pen that didn't skip this time. She had called her mother from the hospital bathroom with the tap running so the sound didn't carry, and that conversation was the one place she had allowed herself to break. Not fully, not in the way that she needed to, but enough. Her mother's voice saying her name in Igbo, the way she only did when she was frightened, was the thing that cracked the surface. Amara had pressed her back against the cold bathroom tile and breathed through it and said, "I'm coming home, Mama. Not yet, but soon. I just need a little more time." Her mother had said, "Take whatever time you need. I'll be here." She had dried her face and walked back into her room and continued being functional. She did not see Cassian before she left. He was in the waiting room down the hall. She knew he was there. The nurse had confirmed it once, quietly, with the implicit question underneath. And she did not go to him. She asked for a hospital car service. She went home to the mansion on the hill, walked through the rooms she had lived in for 2 years, and began, methodically and without ceremony, to separate the things that were hers from the things that were not. It took less time than she expected. She had not accumulated as much in this house as she'd believed. There were her clothes, her medical textbooks, her equipment bag, a small collection of her mother's fabric that she'd brought from Lagos and hung on the wall of what was supposed to become the nursery, the framed photo of her at her surgical residency graduation that she'd kept on the desk in the study, and a ceramic bowl her grandmother had made by hand that sat on the kitchen windowsill and had no business being in this house at all except that she'd brought it the first month because she'd been homesick and hadn't wanted to admit it. She took the bowl first, wrapped it in one of her shirts and put it in the bag. She was in the middle of taking down the fabric from the nursery wall when she heard the front door. She knew his footsteps. Of course she did. After 2 years you learn the specific rhythm of a person's walk, the weight of them in a space, the way their presence changes the air pressure in a room. She heard him come through the entrance, pause in the hallway, and then continue toward the stairs. She stayed where she was. She kept taking down the fabric, carefully, the way her mother had taught her to fold it so the pattern didn't crease. He appeared in the doorway. He looked at the bag on the floor, at the bare wall, at her hand still holding the fabric. "I can explain about the medic," he said. "I don't need you to explain anything." "Amara, I signed the first papers this morning." She turned to face him. She had decided, somewhere between the hospital discharge and this moment, that she was going to look him in the eye. She owed herself that much. "Min Jae-won's office will send yours within a week. I'm not contesting anything. I just want this to be done." Cassian stood in the doorway. He had never looked small to her before. He looked small now. Not physically. He was the same man he'd always been, broad-shouldered and contained. But in some essential way, the size he'd always taken up in her understanding of the world had shifted. She could see around him now. That was new. "The medic was coached," he said. "Someone told him to exaggerate her condition. I'm looking into it. That's not my problem. It means I was lied to. It means last night you chose not to pick up the phone." Her voice didn't shake. "Whatever someone told you about Celine's condition, you made the choice. You saw my calls. You set the phone down. That's all I need to know." He was quiet. "Did you love her?" she asked. The question came out differently than she'd planned it. More human. She had not planned to ask it at all. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Did something happen between you?" Another pause. The kind that answered the question before the words did. Not in the way you're thinking. It wasn't." He stopped, started again. "It was something I let happen gradually. I didn't protect the line the way I should have." She nodded. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She folded the last piece of fabric, placed it in the bag, and picked the bag up off the floor. She walked toward the door, toward him, and stopped when she was close enough that she could have touched him if she'd wanted to. She didn't want to. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I mean that." She walked past him, down the stairs, through the house that smelled like expensive nothing, and out the door. She called a car from the driveway. She sat on the front step with her bag and waited, and while she waited, she did not look back at the house. She looked at the dark gardens and the rain-wet driveway and the strip of gray sky visible above the gate. The car came. She got in. 3 weeks later, Cassian's grandfather called him to a private meeting at the family estate in Gyeonggi-do. Baek Sungjin was 83 years old and had built the foundation of what the Kong organization had become from almost nothing in the years before his daughter married into the family name. He was small now, the way very old men get small, but his eyes were the same eyes they had always been, flat and precise and interested in things other people missed. He was one of 2 people in Cassian's life that he had never been able to fully read, the other being Amara. He met Cassian in the study and did not offer tea. He put a folder on the desk between them. "Sit down," he said. Cassian sat. "I've had my people looking into last year," his grandfather said. "Calendar records, phone logs, driver records, medical bills." He tapped the folder. "There is a pattern." Cassian opened the folder. He read. He read for a long time. The documents inside were dense and cross-referenced, and some of them required reading twice to fully parse. Calendar records showing that Cassian's schedule had been altered, meetings moved, appointments shifted, on 17 separate occasions over 14 months, most of them on dates that aligned precisely with moments Amara had needed him. Driver logs showing that on 6 occasions, his car had been rerouted by someone with access to the dispatch system. Phone records showing a series of calls between Celine's personal number and a number registered to a shell company that traced, with enough layers peeled back, to a holding firm connected to Jung Soo-yeon's private financial manager. He turned the last page. His grandfather was watching him. "Who else has seen this?" Cassian asked. 3 people. They're mine. They're loyal." "How long have you been building this?" "Since the night your wife drove herself to the hospital." Cassian set the folder down. He pressed his palms flat on the desk. He breathed through his nose once, slowly, the way he did when he was deciding something and didn't want the deciding to show on his face. "My mother," he said. His grandfather said nothing. The nothing confirmed it. "And Celine." Still nothing. Cassian sat back in his chair. He looked at the folder on the desk between them. He thought about 17 calendar changes, 14 months. He thought about Amara calling 23 times, her voice in that one message he'd listened to at 2 in the morning, calm and terrified in the specific way of a person who has trained themselves not to sound terrified. Something is wrong. Please call me back. He thought about her face in that hospital corridor, the way she had looked away. He thought about the nursery with the empty wall. I need everything authenticated, he said. Every piece. Ironclad. It will take another 3 weeks. Then take 3 weeks. He picked up the folder and held it in both hands. No one else. Not my lawyers. Not my people. Yours. His grandfather nodded once. Cassian stood. He tucked the folder under his arm. He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. She already signed the papers, he said. He wasn't sure who he was telling, maybe just himself. It doesn't matter what this says. She already made her decision. His grandfather looked at him with those flat, precise eyes. I know, the old man said. I'm not building this for her. I'm building it so you know the full truth of what you were part of, whether you knew it or not. He paused. And so that the people who used you to destroy your own family do not get to simply walk away. Cassian stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then he walked out into the cold afternoon, the folder under his arm and his grandfather's words sitting in his chest like a coal. He drove back to Seoul alone. No driver, no security, just the highway and the gray November sky and the weight of everything he had not yet fully begun to grieve. Halfway home, his phone lit up with a message from Celine. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please. He looked at the message. He put the phone in the glove compartment. He drove the rest of the way in silence, and when he pulled up to the empty mansion on the hill and sat in the parked car in the driveway for a long moment before going inside, what he felt was not anger exactly. It was something older and quieter and more final than anger. It was the understanding that some things, once broken in a particular way, do not offer a second form. They simply become the shape of what was lost, preserved exactly as they fell. And the only honest thing left to do is look at without flinching, and move through, and carry forward, and never be able to put back the way it was. He went inside. He did not turn on any lights. The 3 weeks his grandfather asked for became 4. Cassian did not rush it. Rushing was for men who were afraid the truth would disappear if they didn't catch it fast enough. He had spent enough years in rooms where patience was the only weapon that couldn't be taken from you. He waited. He kept his schedule. He attended the meetings he needed to attend, signed the documents that required signing, and said the right things to the right people with the particular blankness that those around him interpreted as composure. And that was, in fact, something closer to suspension. He was a man waiting for the floor to finish falling. The divorce paperwork moved quietly through the legal system. Min Jae-won's office was efficient. Cassian's own lawyers, to their credit or to his clear instruction, did not contest a single line. The process was almost insulting in its cleanliness, the way it reduced 2 years of marriage and 1 child and a night that had rearranged everything into a set of documents with signature lines and notary stamps. He signed his copies on a Wednesday afternoon at his desk in the main office building, alone, without ceremony, with a pen that worked on the first stroke. He did not tell anyone. Not his deputy, not his grandmother, not his mother, who had called him 11 times since the morning in the hospital waiting room, and whom he had spoken to exactly once, briefly, about a business matter, in a tone that communicated clearly that they were not yet ready to discuss the other thing. She had understood. His mother always understood tone. Amara, he learned from Min's office, had returned to Nigeria 6 days after the divorce was filed. She had not announced it. She had not sent a message. She had packed whatever was left of her life in that house, arranged for the rest to be shipped, and gotten on a plane. He found out because Min mentioned it in passing, almost apologetically, and Cassian had nodded and said thank you and moved on to the next item. He thought about her on the plane. He thought about whether she had slept on the flight, whether she'd eaten anything, whether she'd cried at some point over the Atlantic in the dark of the cabin when there was no one around to manage herself for. He hoped she had. He hoped she had let herself break somewhere private where no one could see her, because she was the kind of person who carried too much with too much grace for too long, and that kind of carrying always has a cost. He thought about this, and then he stopped thinking about it because it was not his business anymore. He had made it not his business. That was the accurate way to say it. The folder from his grandfather sat in the top drawer of his desk at home. He had read it 4 more times. Each reading clarified something and broke something else in equal measure. The full authentication came on a Thursday morning in December. His grandfather's man, a quiet, methodical former intelligence analyst named O, who wore the same style of gray jacket every time Cassian saw him and spoke in the careful cadence of someone for whom precision was a form of respect, sat across from Cassian in the study at the Gyeonggi-do estate and walked him through every document. It took 2 hours. By the end of it, the picture was complete. Not a suspicion, not a theory, a documented, cross-referenced, authenticated record of 14 months of deliberate manipulation executed by two people who knew exactly what they were doing and had taken considerable care not to leave clean edges. Celine had begun cultivating Cassian's emotional dependency, 18 months into his marriage to Amara. O laid it out in plain terms, reading from his notes without editorializing, manufactured crises, exaggerated health episodes, a slow and methodical campaign to position herself as the person Cassian turned to first. She had access to his schedule through her legitimate role as his executive assistant. She used that access to create small, recurring patterns, arriving early to morning meetings, being present during high-stress decision points, making herself indispensable in the way that certain people are very good at making themselves indispensable, while simultaneously using that same schedule access to ensure that Cassian was never available during the moments Amara needed him most. None of it was accidental. Young Soo-yeon's involvement was older and ran deeper. She had disapproved of Amara from the beginning, not loudly, not confrontationally, but in the sustained, quiet way that is far more dangerous than open opposition. She had recognized in Celine a useful instrument and had provided resources, access to Cassian's communication infrastructure through an intermediary, financial backing for the shell company that compensated the medic who coached Celine's episodes, and the kind of institutional knowledge of her own son that only a mother has, the precise understanding of which levers to pull, which fears to activate, which loyalties to exploit. The night of the miscarriage had not been an escalation. It had been a culmination. O finished reading. He closed his notes. He waited. Cassian sat very still. "The medic," he said finally, "has been located. He's willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity from civil action. He says Ms. Park contacted him directly on 8 separate occasions." "What does he say about that night specifically?" O looked at his notes, though Cassian understood he already knew what they said. "He says Miss Park called him at 6:47 p.m. and told him to deliver a reading of 160/100 regardless of what the actual reading was. She told him you needed to believe it was urgent." Cassian pressed 2 fingers against his mouth. He breathed through his nose. 160/100, he said. "Yes." "The actual reading was 140/92. "Correct." The difference between those two numbers was the difference between a possible emergency and a confirmed one. It was a small lie, a 20-point lie. The kind of lie that was easy to tell and easy to believe and had sent him across a hospital in the rain to stand in a VIP clinic holding another woman's coat open while his wife bled in a corridor 30 feet away. He removed his fingers from his mouth. "I want this in front of a prosecutor," he said. O nodded. "That can be arranged. However," he paused. The pause was professional, not hesitant. "Once this goes to a prosecutor, it becomes a matter of public record. The press will have access." "I know." "The Kong name will be associated with—" "I know." He said it the same way he'd said it to his mother. A door closing. "That's not the priority." O nodded again. He closed his briefcase with a small, precise click. "There is one more thing." Cassian looked at him. "Ms. Park has been in contact with your mother 3 times in the past 2 weeks, since you stopped returning her calls." O met his eyes steadily. "The calls are short, under 4 minutes each, but the last one was the day before yesterday." Cassian said nothing. "I don't know what was discussed," O said. "I have the call records, not the content." "They're coordinating," Cassian said. Not a question. "That would be my assessment." He stood up. He thanked O. He walked to the window of the estate study and looked out at the winter garden, brown and bare and precise, the hedges trimmed to geometric perfection by the groundskeeper who had worked here for 30 years and who had known Cassian since he was small enough to hide behind those hedges during his grandfather's formal dinners. He thought about Celine's voice on the phone, the way she'd said, "I need to talk to you" in that message, the urgency he'd recognized even through the screen of the glove compartment. He thought about his mother's face in the hospital waiting room when he'd told her Amara was filing for divorce. The particular quality of her silence. Not grief, not shock. Something that had looked at the time like resignation, but which he now understood had been something closer to calculation. He thought about Amara in that corridor, the blood on her clothes that he'd registered and then immediately, instinctively pushed aside because his mind had not wanted to hold both things at once. He understood now that that instinct had been manufactured, trained into him. 14 months of small adjustments to his attention, his availability, his emotional landscape, until the night came when the instinct to turn towards Celine felt as natural as breathing. He had been handled. The word arrived in his chest with a particular kind of weight. He had been handled by two people who knew him completely and had used that knowledge to take his marriage apart from the inside, one schedule change at a time, one fabricated emergency at a time, one 40-point blood pressure lie at a time, until the night when it mattered most, he had been exactly where they needed him to be. He called Celine that afternoon. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. Cashin. Her voice was careful. Warm, but careful, the way it always was when she was not sure of her footing. "I need to see you," he said. "Today." A pause. Brief. "Of course. Where?" "The office. 6 o'clock. Come alone." Another pause, longer this time. "Is everything all right?" 6 o'clock, he said, and ended the call. He arrived at the office building at 5:30. He asked his deputy to clear the floor. He sat at the long conference table with the folder in front of him and the city lights coming up through the floor-to-ceiling windows as the December dark arrived early and complete. Celine walked in at 6:02. She was wearing her coat, a different one from that night, charcoal wool, well-fitted, and her expression was composed with the particular effort of someone who has had hours to prepare a face. She stopped when she saw the folder on the table. Her eyes went to it and stayed there for 1 second too long. "Sit down," Cassian said. She sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him. "I want to tell you something before I say anything else," she said. "No." She blinked. "I'm not interested in what you plan to say coming in here," he said. "I'm going to show you what I have. Then I'm going to ask you one question. That's how this works." He opened the folder. He turned it to face her. He slid it across the table. She looked down at it. She was very good. He had always known she was good at this, at the management of her own face, at the calibration of response. She read the first page and her expression didn't change. She turned to the second page, turned to the third. Her right hand, still folded over her left, pressed slightly tighter. He watched her thumb whiten against her own knuckle. She read for 4 minutes. Then she closed the folder and looked up at him. "Cassian," she said. "One question," he said, "but did you know she was calling that night? Did you know she was trying to reach me while you were standing next to me in that clinic?" The silence that followed was 7 seconds long. He counted. "Yes," she said. The word was barely audible, but it was clear. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the city moved in its indifferent way, lights multiplying in the dark, traffic below, the ordinary mechanical hum of a world continuing to operate. Cashin looked at her across the table. He thought about 23 missed calls. He thought about a woman driving alone in the rain with one hand on her abdomen and one hand on the wheel. He thought about 2 seconds of eye contact in a hospital corridor. He thought about a nursery with an empty wall and a ceramic bowl wrapped in a shirt. "You knew she was calling," he said, "and you said nothing." Celine's jaw tightened. When she spoke, the warmth was gone from her voice entirely. What was underneath it was something harder and more honest. "I knew if you answered, you would go to her. I knew if you went to her, everything I had spent—" She stopped, started again. "I needed you to stay." "You needed me to stay. I know how that sounds." "You knew she might be in danger." His voice was still level. This was the thing about cold, real cold, the trained kind. It didn't require volume. "You stood next to me in that room and you let her calls go unanswered because you needed me to stay." Celine looked at him with the expression of someone who has just stepped off a very high place and is in the fraction of a second before the fall begins. In that expression, he could see for the first time clearly the full architecture of what she'd done. Not in the documents, he'd seen it in the documents, but in her face, the scale of it, the duration, the cost. "Whatever you're planning to do," she said, and her voice was different now, stripped of everything practiced. "I want you to know that what I felt was real. Whatever you think of me, whatever this looks like to you, what I felt was real." "I believe you," he said. She blinked. That surprised her. "What you felt was real," he said, "and it didn't matter at all." He closed the folder and pulled it back across the table toward him. "Because real feelings don't justify what you did. They don't justify any of it, and they especially don't give you the right to decide that your needs were worth more than my wife's life, or my child's." Celine looked at the table. "You're going to be contacted by prosecutors," he said. "I would recommend getting a lawyer, a good one, not someone connected to this family." She looked up. "I'll cooperate," he said. "I'll give them everything, my own failure included." He stood. "I'm not doing this to punish you specifically. I'm doing it because I spent 14 months being managed like a piece on a board, and a woman I loved drove herself to a hospital alone at night, and our child died, and someone has to answer for that in a room with actual consequences." Celine was still seated. She had not moved since he stood. She looked smaller than she'd ever looked to him, not in a satisfying way. Just in the way of something that has been reduced to its actual size after a long time of appearing larger. "Go home," he said. "Tell whoever you need to tell. You have 24 hours before I make the call." She stood. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame, the same place he'd stood in the nursery doorway, he thought, though he didn't say that, and she turned back. "She was lucky," Celine said. "Whatever you think of me, Amara was lucky. To have been loved by you, even badly." He looked at her. "She didn't feel lucky," he said. Celine left. He called his mother at 8:15 that evening. He did not go to see her. He did not want to be in the same room. He needed the distance of the phone, the small barrier of it, because he was not certain what he would do with his hands if he were sitting across from her, and she said what he expected her to say. She picked up on the third ring. "Cassian." Her voice was measured, prepared. "I've been to see Celine," he said. A pause. Short. "How is she?" "Don't," he said. The same word, the same door. His mother was quiet. "I have the phone records," he said, "the schedule logs, the payments to the medic through your financial manager's shell company. I have the authentication from grandfather's people, and I have Celine's verbal confirmation from this evening." He paused. "I have everything." The silence from his mother's end was different from any silence he'd heard from her before. Not calculating, not composing, just present. The silence of a person who has run out of space to move. "You've spoken to your grandfather," she said finally. "For several weeks." She exhaled. It was a quiet sound, almost private. "I did what I believed was necessary." "For what?" "For the family." Her voice was steady, but it had the quality of something that has been held steady for a very long time and is approaching the outer limit of that effort. "She was not right for you. She was never going to. She was my wife." The cold in his voice had become something else now, something that ran beneath cold, older than cold. "She was carrying my child, and you decided that your opinion of whether she was right for me was worth more than her life. I never intended for her to. You don't get to qualify it." His voice rose slightly. "Not much. Just enough. You tampered with my schedule. You paid someone to lie to me about a medical emergency. You used Celine as a tool, and you used my own feelings against me, and you did all of it for 14 months, while Amara sat in that house alone and wondered what she'd done wrong." He stopped. He breathed. "She thought it was her. Did you know that? She thought she was the problem." His mother said nothing. "You have 24 hours, he said. "The same as Celine." "Cassian, 24 hours, he said. "Get a lawyer, not a family lawyer, someone independent." He paused. "And don't call me again, not until this is in front of a prosecutor." He ended the call. He set the phone down on his desk and stood at the window for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. The folder in his hand, the city below, the winter dark outside the glass. He thought about something his grandfather had said. "I'm not building this so you can fix it. I'm building it so you know the full truth of what you were part of. He knew it now. All of it. The full geometry of what had been done to him and through him and in his name. He knew the exact shape of every piece, authenticated and cross-referenced and sitting in a folder in his hands. And Amara was in Lagos. And the child was gone. And knowing the full truth of a thing does not restore what the thing destroyed. It does not reach backward through time and put a man's hand on his phone at 9:15 on a Tuesday night. It does not change the 23 calls. It does not change the corridor. He thought about this for a while. Then he picked up his phone and made a different call. Not to a lawyer, not to his grandfather, not to anyone in the network that had surrounded him his entire life. He called the head of the sole prosecutor's office directly. The man answered on the second ring, surprised enough that his professionalism briefly preceded his composure. "This is Cassian Kong," Cassian said. "I have evidence of conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and conduct that directly contributed to the death of an unborn child. I want to meet with your office tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. He paused. "And I want to make clear from the beginning that I am not seeking a deal. I'm not here to negotiate my own position. I will cooperate fully and without condition, including regarding my own failures." He paused again. "I need you to understand that what I'm bringing you is complete, and I need you to understand that I expect it to go all the way." The prosecutor was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Kong," he said carefully, "are you aware that the individuals named in this evidence include—" "My mother and my former executive assistant," Cassian said. "Yes, I'm aware. That's why I'm calling you directly instead of going through the normal channels." Another pause. 8 a.m. He ended the call. He set the phone down. He opened the folder one more time and looked at the first page. The calendar record, the first altered date, 14 months ago. A Tuesday in October. A dinner with Amara that he had canceled because Celine had a schedule conflict she'd flagged as urgent. He remembered that evening. He remembered calling Amara to cancel, and she had said it was fine, she'd order in, he should handle whatever needed handling. She had said it easily, without weight, the way people say things when they've already learned not to expect too much. He closed the folder. "I thought about a woman who had been quietly expecting less and less for 14 months, because two people who claimed to love him had been engineering exactly that, one small adjustment at a time, until the night she drove herself to a hospital alone, and he didn't pick up the phone. He sat down at his desk. He had one more thing to do before tomorrow morning. Not a legal matter. Not a strategic one. He opened his laptop, opened a blank document, and began to write. Not to his lawyers, not to the press, not to Celine or his mother or anyone inside the world he had occupied for the past decade. He wrote to Amara. He wrote for a long time and deleted most of it because the sentences kept trying to explain themselves and explanation was not what this was supposed to be. He started over 3 times. The fourth version was shorter than the others. It said what it needed to say without architecture or justification or the particular dishonesty of beautiful language applied to ugly facts. When he was done, he read it once. Then he closed the laptop without sending it. Not yet. There was something he needed to do first, something that had to happen in a public room, on record, in the daylight, before he had any right to send that letter. A confession that belonged not in a private email, but in a form that could not be taken back or softened or explained away. The kind of accounting that required standing in front of people who had no reason to be gentle with him and saying, without the protection of legal strategy or family name or cultivated reputation, exactly what he had done and exactly what he had failed to do. He owed her that much before he said another word to her. He owed it to the shape of what was gone. He turned off the desk lamp, sat in the dark office for a moment, and then reached into the top drawer and put the folder inside a document envelope and sealed it shut with the precise, unhurried movements of a man who has made an irreversible decision and is now simply moving through the necessary motions of a man preparing to burn down everything he had built, so that something truer could be built in its place. The 8 a.m. meeting with the sole prosecutor's office lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Cassian arrived alone. No lawyers, as promised. No security visible, though 2 of his grandfather's men sat in a car outside, because some habits are structural rather than optional. He wore a plain dark suit, no tie, and he carried the sealed envelope under his arm like a man carrying something heavier than its physical weight, which was exactly what it was. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Cha Eun-ji, 47, with the compact, unimpressed demeanor of someone who had spent 2 decades sitting across from powerful men who believed their power would function as a kind of cushion in rooms like this one. It never did, in her experience. She had learned to clock the moment each of them understood that. With some men it took an hour. With some it took the better part of a morning. With Cassian Kang it took approximately 40 seconds, which was how long it took him to sit down, open the envelope, place the documents on the table between them, and say, in a voice that carried no performance of any kind, I want to tell you what I know, what I failed to see, and what I should have done differently. I'll start with my failures because they're the foundation of everything else. Cha looked at him for a moment. Then she uncapped her pen. He talked for 4 hours. He did not minimize. He did not redirect. When she asked about his own conduct, the calls he had seen and ignored, the pattern of availability he had permitted Celine to establish, the ways in which he had allowed his schedule to be managed by someone with an undisclosed interest in managing it, he answered without deflection. He said, I saw the calls with the same directness he used for everything else. He said, I made the choice not to pick up in the same tone he used to describe the shell company payments and the manipulated calendar records. He made no distinction between the things that had been done to him and the things he had done himself, because in his understanding they were part of the same event, and the only way to tell the truth about it was to tell all of it. Cha's 2 junior prosecutors took notes throughout. Cha herself wrote very little. She asked her questions in the flat, precise way of someone who is listening not just to what is being said, but to the structure of how it is being said, the places where sentences slow down or speed up, the pauses that come before certain answers. Cassian recognized the technique. He had used versions of it himself, in different rooms, across different tables. He answered her directly each time, without the pauses she was trained to watch for, because there was nothing he was trying to hide. When it was over, she looked at the document spread across the table and then looked at him. Mr. Kong, she said, in your experience, and I'm asking this as a factual question, not a rhetorical one, have you ever seen an individual voluntarily submit evidence of this scope against members of their own family without any negotiation regarding their own exposure? He thought about it. No, he said. Neither have I, she said. She capped her pen. We'll need you available for follow-up. Don't travel internationally without notifying this office. Understood. And Mr. Kong, she looked at him once more, directly, with the particular quality of attention she had not deployed toward him until this moment. What you've provided here, the scope of it, the authentication, this is going to become public. Probably within the week once we begin the arrest process. The press will cover it. I know. It will not be flattering to you. I know that too. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she stood, gathered the top documents into a neat stack and said, We'll be in touch. He walked out into the December morning, down the steps of the building, and stood on the pavement for a moment in the cold air. His grandfather's men were in the car across the street. He did not go to them. He stood on the pavement and breathed the cold air and felt the particular hollowness of a thing completed. Not resolved, not healed, but completed. The first step of a longer walk taken, irrevocably, and the ground still solid underneath. His phone had 14 messages from numbers he didn't recognize. The press had started. Someone had leaked. Not from the prosecutor's office, too fast for that, which meant someone from within his own network who knew about the morning meeting. He put the phone in his jacket pocket without reading them. He walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away. He ordered black coffee. He sat at a table by the window and drank it slowly and watched the street outside and did not think about anything in particular for exactly 22 minutes, which was the longest he had sat without an active objective in as long as he could remember. Then he took out his phone and called his grandfather. Young Soo-yeon's arrest happened the following Tuesday. Cassian was not present. He had been asked by Cha's office whether he wanted to be informed of the timing in advance, and he had said no. He did not want to know the moment. He did not want to spend the intervening hours doing what he would inevitably do, which was picture it. His mother in her precise clothes, with her precise posture, opening the door to whatever came next. He had enough pictures in his head. He didn't need more. He learned it had happened from his grandmother, who called him at 11 in the morning in a voice he had never heard from her before. Not broken exactly. Compressed. The sound of a woman pressing an enormous amount of weight into a very small space so she could keep speaking. She didn't fight it, his grandmother said. Okay, he said. She asked them to wait while she changed her jacket. A pause. She changed her jacket before they took her. He closed his eyes briefly. Even now, even at the door with the handcuffs, his mother had changed her jacket. Halmione, he said, are you at the house? Yes. I'll come tonight. He went that evening. He sat with his grandmother in the front room of the estate for 2 hours. She made tea. She brought out a plate of rice cakes that he recognized from his childhood, the same kind she'd made for his birthday every year without variation. And he ate 2 of them without registering the taste, and she watched him eat with the expression of a woman who understood that there was nothing useful left to say and had decided to express what she needed to express through the act of feeding him instead. They didn't talk about Jung Soo-yeon directly. They talked around her the way you talk around something very large in the middle of a room, carefully, in reference, acknowledging the shape without looking at it directly. His grandmother said once, quietly, almost to her tea, she loved you in the only way she knew how. And Cassian said, I know, because it was true, and because it changed nothing. And those 2 things existed simultaneously without canceling each other out. Celine's arrest had come the same day, earlier in the morning. He learned this from O, who sent a brief text with no punctuation. Park Celine taken into custody, 0840, cooperating. He read the message and put the phone down and did not revisit it. The press conference was his idea. Chuz's office had not required it. His lawyers, he had finally brought in lawyers, for the limited purpose of ensuring he said nothing during the conference that would complicate the prosecution, had strongly advised against it. His grandfather had said nothing either way, which in the old man's vocabulary meant, this is yours to decide, and I will not interfere, and I will not pretend I could stop you if I wanted to. He scheduled it for a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the arrests, in the main conference hall of the Kong Group's legitimate corporate headquarters building. Not a hotel ballroom, not a neutral venue, but this building specifically, because this was where the business name lived, and this was where the accounting needed to happen. He prepared no written statement. He made 1 set of notes on a single index card and put it in his breast pocket and did not look at it again. The room held approximately 200 journalists. It was standing room only by the time he walked in at 2 p.m., the way a room is when something genuinely unexpected is expected to happen. The air had the particular density of collective held breath. Cameras clicked before he reached the podium. Voices overlapped briefly and then settled into a taut, focused silence as he reached the microphone. He looked out at the room. He thought about Amara's face in the corridor, the way she had turned her eyes to the ceiling, the way she had not looked back. He put both hands on the sides of the podium, not gripping it, just placing them there, a point of physical orientation, and he began to speak. He did not start with the conspiracy. He did not start with his mother or Celine or the documents or the prosecutors. He started where the story actually started, which was with himself. 14 months before the night that ended my marriage, he said, I began allowing my schedule, my attention, and my emotional availability to be managed by someone who had an interest in managing them. I did not examine that process critically because it was comfortable and it served me in the short term, and those are the conditions under which most men miss the things they should see. He paused. His voice was steady. My wife called me 23 times on the night she went into a medical emergency. I saw the first 3 calls and I chose not to answer them. That choice was mine. Whatever manipulation surrounded it, and I will speak to that, the choice was mine, and I want to be clear about that before I say anything else. The room was completely quiet. He spoke for 38 minutes. He described in plain and specific language the scheme that had been executed against his marriage. He described the calendar manipulations, the fabricated emergencies, the coached blood pressure reading. He described the shell company and his mother's financial manager and the 14 months of documented interference. He named Jung Soo-yeon. He named Celine Park. He cited the evidence that had been turned over to prosecutors and confirmed that both individuals were in custody. And then, in the same tone, without transition, he described himself. His own failure of attention, the calls he had silenced, the pattern of absence that had made him a useful instrument, the specific moment in the hospital corridor when he had seen his wife on a gurney covered in blood and had stood frozen for 2 seconds and let the doors close between them. He did not cry. He was not performing composure. I was simply a man saying the things that were true in the order they needed to be said. My son did not survive that night, he said. He had not planned to say son specifically. The word came from somewhere below the prepared part of his mind. My wife drove herself to the hospital alone. She had called me 23 times. He stopped for a moment, just a moment. I have spent the past weeks ensuring that the people who engineered that situation face legal accountability. I want to be absolutely clear that I believe they should, and I will cooperate with every aspect of the prosecution. Another pause. I also want to be clear that legal accountability for them does not constitute accountability for me. I bear responsibility for the choices I made, regardless of the context those choices were made in. There is no version of this story in which I am not the man who didn't pick up the phone. 30 journalists were trying to ask questions simultaneously when he finished. He answered 6 of them. Not evasively, not strategically. He answered the ones that asked things he thought deserved an answer and declined the ones that were reaching for performance rather than information. When a journalist near the back asked him what he intended to do going forward with the Kang Group, he was quiet for a moment. I'm resigning from operational leadership, he said, effective at the end of this month. He had not told anyone this before this moment. He had decided it on the walk to the podium. I'll remain a shareholder in the legitimate business holdings. The criminal operations will be wound down or turned over to law enforcement where that's appropriate. The process will take time, but it will happen. He paused. I recognize that this statement is easy to make and harder to execute. I expect to be held to it. Someone asked if he had spoken to his ex-wife. He looked at the journalist. Young, maybe 30, with the slightly stunned expression of someone who had not expected to be called on. No, he said. Not recently. He paused. That's not something I'll be discussing today. He thanked the room. He stepped back from the podium. The noise that rose from the assembled journalists was the specific noise of 200 people trying to process something simultaneously. Not a roar, not applause, but a kind of collective exhale followed immediately by the surge of simultaneous voices, cameras, movement. He walked through it without stopping, back through the door he'd come in, and into the corridor beyond. His deputy was waiting. The man looked at him with an expression that contained in roughly equal measure loyalty, distress, and the particular bewilderment of someone who has followed a leader into unexpected terrain. You didn't tell me about the resignation, his deputy said. I know. Cassian straightened his jacket. I didn't know myself until just now. That's... His deputy stopped, started again. That's going to create significant... Yes. He looked at the man. Are you staying? A pause. Brief. Yes. Then we'll handle the significant together, starting Monday. He put his hand on the man's shoulder briefly. Not the kind of gesture he made often, not with subordinates, but it felt correct in this moment. Go home tonight. See your family. He walked down the corridor and out a side exit to where his car was waiting. He got in. He sat in the back seat. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror, waiting for a destination. Just drive for a while, Cassian said. Anywhere. I don't care. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Cassian sat in the moving car and watched the city pass outside the window. The winter light was going flat and thin, the way it did in December in Seoul, everything washed to the same pale gray. The streets were full of ordinary movement, people with shopping bags and coffee cups and phones pressed to their ears. A woman pushing a stroller, head bent against the wind. A group of school children in matching coats filing past a crossing guard. He watched the woman with the stroller until the car moved past her and she was gone. He reached into his breast pocket and took out the index card. His prepared notes. He had written 3 lines on it, none of which he had used. He turned it over. On the blank side, he wrote, with the pen from his jacket, Nigeria. Then he put the card back in his pocket and looked out the window again. The press coverage ran for 4 days at full intensity and then shifted to the lower, sustained hum of a story that had become part of the ongoing news cycle rather than the center of it. Cha's office issued a statement confirming charges. Legal analysts appeared on television to discuss the scope and implications. The Kong name appeared in headlines in 7 countries. Cassian read almost none of it. He was busy. Unwinding a criminal network is not a dramatic process. It does not happen in a single decisive moment or a clean sweep. It happens in meetings with lawyers and prosecutors and financial forensic specialists, in the careful documentation of assets and flows and connections, in conversations with people who have worked inside a system for years and are now being asked to help dismantle the parts of it that cannot continue. It is tedious, detailed, unglamorous work. It is also, Cashin discovered, the kind of work that does not leave room for much else, which was either a benefit or a punishment depending on the hour. He sold 3 properties. He dissolved 2 holding companies. He authorized the transfer of evidence regarding 6 ongoing criminal operations to law enforcement. Each of these actions had its own specific weight and its own specific consequence, and he moved through them without sentiment but not without awareness. He knew what each one cost. He was choosing to pay. His mother's arraignment was on a Wednesday. He did not attend. He received a text from the family lawyer, the old one, who had served his grandfather since before Cashin was born, that said simply, "Pled not guilty. Trial date pending." He replied, "Thank you for letting me know." He set the phone down. He went back to the document he'd been reviewing. Celine had entered into a cooperation agreement with the prosecutors. Cha's office had informed him of this in the same flat, factual tone with which they communicated everything. He had said thank you and asked if his continued cooperation was needed for the next phase, and been told yes and said he would be available. He did not ask what Celine was saying in her cooperation sessions. He did not want to know the interior of her reasoning any more than he already did. It was on a Thursday evening, 5 weeks after the press conference, that he opened his laptop and found the article. He had set up a news alert, not for his own name, but for Amara's, weeks ago. In the same quiet, non-strategic way he'd started doing other things he would not have done before. Not surveillance, just awareness. The knowledge that she existed in the world and was moving through it. The alert had brought him 2 previous results. A mention in a Nigerian medical journal crediting her as a co-author on a paper about maternal hemorrhage protocols, and a brief line in a Lagos Society column noting her attendance at a hospital fundraising event. He had read both and felt something that did not have a clean name. This article was different. It was from an international health news outlet, published that morning. The headline was simple: Nigerian surgeon Amara Nwosu launches Maternal Health Foundation, citing personal loss as catalyst. The article was 300 words. It described the launch of the Nwosu Maternal Health Foundation, headquartered in Lagos, with an initial endowment funded through a combination of personal funds and international health grants. The foundation's stated mission was emergency obstetric care access across sub-Saharan Africa, with particular focus on rural areas where the absence of skilled emergency care during complications remained a leading cause of maternal and infant mortality. He read the article twice. Then he looked at the small photograph that accompanied it. She was standing outside what looked like a newly opened clinic, in clinical white, smiling at something outside the frame. Not a posed smile, not a public-facing smile, but the specific unguarded expression of a person caught in a genuine moment of something. She looked tired, he thought, tired in the particular way of someone doing something that matters very much to them. It was not the same thing as unhappy. He closed the laptop. He sat at his desk in the dark office for a long time. He opened the laptop again. He opened the document he had written weeks ago, the letter he had composed and not sent, the one he had rewritten 4 times in the hospital, and then finished in this chair and closed without sending because the precondition he'd set for himself hadn't been met yet. He read it. He read it again. He thought about whether the precondition had been met. The press conference had happened. The prosecutors had the evidence. The arrests had been made. The business was in the process of being dismantled. He had stood in front of 200 journalists and said, on record, without legal protection or strategic framing, "I didn't pick up the phone." He thought about whether that was enough of a precondition, whether there was such a thing as enough, whether the letter itself was something she needed or something he needed, or whether that distinction mattered. He decided it mattered. He closed the document without sending it again. Instead, he opened a different window and began making notes on something else. Not a letter, not an explanation, something more concrete, something that could exist in the world independently of her response to it, a structure, a commitment, a thing that would function whether or not she ever acknowledged it, because it wasn't designed for her acknowledgement. It was designed for something else. He worked for 3 hours. He sent 3 emails. He made 2 phone calls, one to his charitable foundation's director, one to an international maternal health organization whose name he had pulled from the article about Amara's foundation as a referenced partner organization. By midnight, he had the outline of something real. By 1 a.m., he had a figure, a number that made his foundation director inhale sharply on the phone and then recover and say professionally that yes, that could be arranged, that yes, it would require some restructuring of existing commitments. And yes, he understood that this was a priority and not a suggestion. Cassian ended that call and sat back in his chair. The donation, which was not yet a donation, was still a plan, still a set of numbers in a document that would require several more steps to become real, was larger than anything the Nwosu Maternal Health Foundation had likely projected for its entire first year. It was structured as a permanent trust, not a one-time gift. It would fund emergency obstetric care infrastructure across 4 countries in Asia, specifically in rural areas, specifically targeting the gap that maternal hemorrhage cases fell into when emergency response was too slow or too distant. It would carry the name of a child who had not survived a night in December, in a hospital corridor in Seoul, while his father stood 30 feet away not answering his phone. Cassian looked at the numbers on the screen. He thought, this does not fix it. He thought, it was never supposed to fix it. He closed the laptop. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked out of the office and down the empty corridor and into the elevator, and stood in the elevator going down and felt the movement of descent, the slight mechanical lurch at the start, the smooth free-fall middle, the gentle arrest at the bottom, and thought about the index card in his breast pocket with the single word on the back. The elevator opened. He walked through the lobby. He pushed through the glass door into the December night. He stood on the pavement in the cold. He reached into his pocket and took out the index card and looked at the word he had written in the car after the press conference. Nigeria. He put it back in his pocket. He looked at the street, the late-night traffic, sparse and indifferent, the cold air that carried the faint smell of the city in winter, concrete and exhaust, and the far-off suggestion of food from somewhere still open. He made the decision standing there on the pavement in the cold, the way the real decisions tend to happen. Not in boardrooms, not at podiums, not in the middle of constructed moments, but in a quiet pause between one thing and the next. When the noise drops for a second, and there is nothing left but the actual question and the actual answer and the amount of courage it takes to let them meet. He was not going to Nigeria to get her back. He understood that. He had understood it, he thought, since the morning in the hospital waiting room when she had not come out to see him. There are things that are finished in a way that cannot be argued with, and what he had seen in her face in that corridor, that specific turning away, that particular and complete withdrawal, was one of them. He was not naive enough to build a plan around reversing it, and not honest enough with himself to pretend that he wasn't still, somewhere below strategy and resolution, hoping for something he had no right to hope for. He was going because he had said in a press conference that he was accountable. An accountability that stays in a press conference is just public relations. He was going because she deserved to hear from him in person, in her space, on ground that was hers, without the surrounding architecture of his world pressing in from every side. He was going because he had written a letter 4 times and deleted it, and the thing he needed to say was not a letter. He was going because her foundation launched emergency maternal care clinics, and he was endowing one that would carry the name of their child, and she deserved to know that from him before she read it anywhere else. He was going mostly because the alternative was spending the rest of his life understanding perfectly what he had lost, and having done nothing except understand it, and he was not willing to accept that as the sufficient answer for a man who was trying, for the first time in his life, to let what was true be more important than what was strategic. He went inside. He booked the flight. He did not tell anyone where he was going. Lagos in February was nothing like Seoul in December. The heat hit him the moment he stepped off the jetway. Not aggressive heat, not the punishing kind, but the deep, ambient warmth of a place that had never made peace with the concept of cold. It was 6 in the morning local time. The airport was already in full motion, voices overlapping in Yoruba and Igbo and English and the particular pidgin that wove between all three. Luggage carts navigating the controlled chaos of an arrivals hall that moved at a tempo he had not expected and found, unexpectedly, clarifying. There was no space in this noise for the particular interior weather he'd been carrying for months. It simply didn't fit. He took a car to the hotel. He had booked something modest by his usual standards. Not a statement, not a punishment, just a clean room in a decent place that was 20 minutes from the address he had found for the Nwosu Maternal Health Foundation's operational headquarters. He showered. He sat on the edge of the bed in the white hotel robe and looked at his phone and thought about what he was going to say. He had no prepared speech. He had made that decision on the plane, somewhere over the Indian Ocean, when he had opened the letter he'd written 4 times and read it one final time and understood that it was still too constructed, too shaped. Every sentence in it had been written by a man thinking about how the sentence would land, and that was not the same as a man simply telling the truth. He closed the document. He did not delete it this time. He just closed it and put his phone away and spent the rest of the flight watching the dark water far below through the small oval window. Not sleeping, not reading, just sitting with the knowledge of where he was going and what he owed and how little he could control about what came next. He did not call ahead. He understood that this was a risk. She might refuse to see him. She had every right to refuse. But calling ahead would give her the option of managing the meeting before it happened, setting terms, building walls, arriving armored. And what he needed, what he had come this far for, was the chance to speak to her without the armor. Not to ambush her, just to be present before the preparation could happen. He arrived at the foundation offices at 9:15 a.m. The building was not what he'd pictured, though he hadn't let himself picture too specifically. It was a converted 2-story structure on a side street in Victoria Island, freshly painted in clean white, with the foundation's name in deep blue above the entrance. The ground floor was clearly a clinic. Through the glass frontage, he could see a waiting area with chairs nearly full at this hour, a reception desk, a board on the wall listing services in 3 languages. It smelled, faintly through the open door, like antiseptic and floor wax, and the particular smell of a place that is cared for by people who believe in what it does. He stood outside for a moment. A woman in blue scrubs passed him on the way in, glanced at him with the briefly assessing look of a person who has learned to clock who belongs and who doesn't, and then went inside without comment. 2 children were sitting with their mother in the waiting area visible through the glass. The younger one asleep across the mother's lap. The older one drawing something on a piece of paper with focused concentration. He pushed open the door and went in. The receptionist was a young man of perhaps 25 who looked up with practiced courtesy and said, in English, "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Dr. Nwosu," Cashin said. "I don't have an appointment. My name is Cashin Kong. She knows who I am." The young man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not dramatically. He was too professional for that. But the name had registered and done something to his composure. He picked up the desk phone. He turned slightly away and spoke quietly for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he turned back. "Dr. Nwosu is in with a patient," he said. "She asks if you would be willing to wait." The fact that she had not said no landed somewhere in Cashin's chest in a way he didn't examine. "I'll wait," he said. "As long as necessary." He sat in one of the chairs along the wall. The mother across from him was now awake, the sleeping child having shifted without waking, and she was looking at him with the open, uncomplicated curiosity that he had noticed in the 10 minutes since he'd arrived was simply how people here looked at things that interested them, directly, without the elaborate social insulation he was accustomed to in Seoul. He nodded at her. She nodded back and then looked at her phone. He waited 40 minutes. He did not look at his own phone. He looked at the room. He looked at the board listing services, emergency obstetric care, postnatal monitoring, newborn critical care, maternal mental health referrals. And he looked at the mother and her children across from him, and he looked at the receptionist who was professionally pretending not to be aware of him, and he looked at his own hands in his lap. 40 minutes. Then the receptionist looked up and said, "Dr. Nwosu will see you now. 2nd floor, end of the hallway." She was standing at the window when he came in. Not posed, not performing. She had her back to the door and she was looking out at the street below, and she had a mug in her right hand that she was holding without drinking from, and she was wearing a white coat over dark trousers, and her hair was shorter than he remembered, close cropped now, and she looked, this was the word his mind produced without consulting him, complete. Like a person who had been assembled into a form that was entirely her own and no longer had any gaps waiting to be filled by something external. He stood in the doorway. She said without turning, "Close the door." He closed it. She turned around. He had prepared himself, he thought. He had spent 4 months preparing himself for the fact that she would look at him differently than she used to. He had told himself this in careful, rational terms on the plane, in the hotel room, in the car on the way here. He had thought he was ready. He was not ready. It was not hostility in her face. That would have been easier. It was something more complicated. The expression of a person who has grieved something completely and arrived on the other side of that grief, not empty, but transformed, and who is now looking at the thing they grieved in its original form and experiencing the specific compound emotion of a person for whom the past is both real and finished simultaneously. She looked at him the way you look at a scar when it's healed, fully present, fully gone. "You could have called," she said. "I know." "I would have answered." "I know that too." He paused. "I didn't want a phone call." She looked at him for a moment. Then she set her mug down on the desk beside her and folded her arms. Not defensively, just the posture of a person thinking. "How long are you in Lagos?" "That depends." "On what?" "On how long this takes." She looked at him. "Cassian, what is it you think this is?" He heard the question clearly, all of it. Not just the surface question, but the one underneath it. The one that was asking whether he had come here with some version of a plan that involved her, and whether she was going to need to dismantle that plan in this room before they could have any other conversation. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that first." She held his gaze. "I came to tell you 3 things in person," he said, "because you deserve to hear them from me and not from a press release or a news alert." She waited. "The first is that I know now, fully and completely, what was done to us. My grandfather's people documented 14 months of deliberate interference. My mother and Celine. Calendar manipulations, fabricated emergencies, a coached medical reading on the night." He stopped. He took a breath. "On that night, I have turned all of it over to prosecutors. My mother has been arraigned, Celine is cooperating. The trial will take time, but the evidence is complete." Amara's face did not change dramatically. Something moved through it. Not surprise, he thought. She had suspected. Maybe she had known, or intuited, in the way that people who are paying close attention sometimes know things before they have the evidence. "The second thing," he said, "is that none of that changes what I did. I want you to hear me say that directly, in person, looking at you. I saw your calls. I chose not to answer. Whatever was done around that choice, the choice was mine, and it caused damage that I cannot—" He paused again. Not because the words weren't there, but because he was making sure he said the right ones. "That I cannot repair. I know that. I'm not here to offer you a repaired version." She was very still. "The third thing," he said, "is about the foundation." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm establishing a permanent charitable trust," he said. "Emergency maternal care infrastructure across 4 countries in Asia, specifically targeting the gap between obstetric emergency and emergency response in rural areas. The trust will operate in partnership with international maternal health organizations, including, if you're willing, yours." He paused. "It carries a name, if you'll allow it. I haven't finalized anything without asking you. The name I want to give it is Adayeze." The silence that followed that word was different from all the silences before it. Adiz. What they had privately decided to call the baby if she was a girl, on a Sunday morning 3 months into the pregnancy, lying in bed in the house on the hill while the rain came down outside, before either of them said it out loud and made it real. He had not known he was going to say it in this room until he said it, and then he understood that he had known all along, the way you know certain things you have been carrying without naming. Amara's jaw tightened. Just once. A small, fast tightening, and then she released it and looked slightly away toward the window and then back at him. And the expression on her face in that moment was the first one he had seen from her that was not fully composed, the first crack in the completeness, and it cost her something to let it be visible. He could see the cost. "You don't know she was a girl," Amara said. Her voice was quiet. "No," he said. "I don't. But that's who she was to me." Another silence. "You should sit down," Amara said. He sat in the chair across from her desk. She remained standing, then appeared to think better of it, and sat down in the chair behind the desk, not as a power position, but because she needed to be seated. He could see that. "Tell me about the trust," she said. Her voice was professional now, controlled. The structure, the scope, he told her. All of it, in the specific, detailed way he had been trained to present things. The endowment figure, the geographic scope, the operational framework, the partnership model. She listened without interrupting, and she asked 3 questions. Sharp, specific, technical questions about disbursement structures and governance and the independence of the trust from any of his remaining business interests. And he answered all 3 clearly and watched her process each answer with the focused intelligence that had always been, quietly, one of the things he had found most arresting about her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The partnership with my foundation, she said. What does that look like structurally? Advisory. You set the clinical standards. Your people develop the protocols, the trust funds, the infrastructure, and staffing. You have veto authority over any programmatic decision. He paused. Your foundation's name takes precedence on all materials. She looked at him steadily. Why? Because it's your work. It's what you built. I'm not attaching myself to it. I'm funding the part that needs funding. The authority stays with you. She held his gaze for a long moment. Cash in, she said. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, exactly. More direct. Why are you really here? He looked at her. I told you, he said. You told me the official version, she said. The 3 things. The trust. You could have done all of that through lawyers, through Min's office. You didn't have to get on a plane. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I didn't. So, he looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. I wanted to see that you were all right. I'm all right. I can see that. Then, I wanted to see it myself, he said. Not read about it, not hear about it. I wanted to be in a room with you and see it with my own eyes, he paused. That's not something I'm asking you to do anything with. I'm not here to tell you it changes what I want or what I need. I gave up the right to have needs that involve you. Another pause. I just needed to see it. Amara looked at him for a long time. The office was quiet. Through the closed door, they could hear distantly the sounds of the clinic floor below, voices, the occasional movement of equipment, the low-frequency hum of a building in use, the sounds of the things she had built, the sounds of it working. I almost didn't survive it, she said. He went still. Not the surgery. She looked at the window. I mean, after, the months after, in Lagos. I had my mother, and I had my work, and I had the idea for the foundation, and I had this enormous constant grief that I couldn't put down and couldn't carry and had no template for. She paused. I had lost a pregnancy and a marriage and a life I had built in another country, and I was 34 years old and I was starting completely over, and some nights I lay in my mother's house and I thought very dark things. She stopped. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you asked me if I was all right, and the full answer is yes, I am now. But it wasn't a straight line. Cassian sat with that. I'm sorry, he said. The words were inadequate. He knew that. He said them anyway, because the alternative was silence, and silence at this particular juncture felt like an abdication. I know you are, she said. She looked back at him. I've watched the news. I saw the press conference. I read the prosecutor's statements. She paused. I know what you did, what you gave up, what you stood up in that room and said. He said nothing. It mattered, she said. I want you to know that. What you did mattered, not to us, not to what we were, but to the truth of it, to the record of what happened. She took a breath. I spent a long time not knowing the full shape of what had been done. Knowing it now doesn't change the outcome, but it changes something. It gives the thing an accurate form. She paused. So, thank you for that. He nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, not the silences of earlier, not the heavy, contested kind. A different quality, something that had been discharged of some of its pressure. Tell me about the foundation, he said. What's the part you're most proud of? She looked at him. He saw the slight surprise at the question, the unexpectedness of being asked not about the structure or the money or the outcomes, but about that specific personal thing. The emergency response protocol, she said, after a moment. We developed it with 3 rural hospitals in Ogun State. It's not complicated. It's actually embarrassingly simple. It's a triaging system for identifying hemorrhage risk in the third trimester that doesn't require specialist equipment, just training and a checklist. We've been piloting it for 8 months. She paused. Last month, one of the hospitals used it to identify a high-risk case early enough to transfer the patient before the emergency happened. The baby is healthy. The mother is home. She paused again. That's the part. He looked at her. That's you, he said. She met his eyes. Yes, she said. It is. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the marriage, not about Korea, not about that night, not about the specific inventory of what had been lost. They talked about the foundation. They talked about the trust. They worked through with the particular focused competence of two people who are both very good at what they do and know it, the actual structural questions of how a partnership between the two entities would function. She asked hard questions. He answered them. She pushed back on 2 aspects of the governance model he had proposed. And she was right to push back, and he said so, and they worked out the modifications together. And by the end of the 2nd hour, there was a draft framework on the notepad on her desk that both of them had contributed to, and that was, objectively, better than what he had arrived with. She called in her operations director at some point, a competent, watchful woman named Ngozi, who shook Cassian's hand with the slightly skeptical air of someone who had been briefed and had formed opinions. And he walked through the financial structure with both of them. Ngozi asked better questions than most of the financial directors he employed in Seoul. He told her so. She received the observation without visible pleasure and asked a follow-up question. When Ngozi left, the room settled back into the particular quiet of 2 people who had finished the business portion of something and were now sitting with the remainder. Will you stay in Seoul? Amara asked. Partly. I'll travel more. The wind down requires presence in several places. He paused. I'm thinking about Hong Kong for part of the year. The trust will need offices there. She nodded. And you? He asked. Legos permanently? For now. I want to open a second clinic in Kano. After that, I'm in conversation with a hospital network in Rwanda. She paused. I'll be moving around. Good, he said. She looked at him. I mean that, he said. You should be. This work should be everywhere you can take it. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked at the notepad between them. She picked up her pen and added something at the bottom of the framework. A note to herself, something about Kano, he thought, though he couldn't read it from where he sat. The name, she said without looking up. Adayaze. She wrote it at the bottom of the page, slowly, with the careful pressure of someone writing something that means more than what it is. I wanted an Igbo on the materials, she said. Not translated, the full name. Done, he said. She looked at the name she had written for a moment. Then she set the pen down. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. I forgive you. She said it in the direct, unceremonious way she said things that had cost her something to arrive at. Not because what happened is acceptable, not because the harm doesn't exist, but because carrying it further is something I'm not willing to do anymore. She looked at him steadily. That's mine. It doesn't mean I want different things than I've already said I want. It doesn't change where I am or where you are. It's just a thing I needed to say out loud to your face. Not in a letter, not through lawyers. Cassian looked at her. He thought about what it had cost her to arrive at that sentence. The months of dark thoughts in her mother's house. The work that had rebuilt her into the person sitting across from him now. The choice, made deliberately and at significant personal cost, to release a weight she would have been entirely justified in carrying forever. Thank you, he said. His voice was lower than usual. Don't thank me, she said, but not unkindly. It's not a gift, it's just maintenance. On my own life, that's all. He nodded. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes? The Sunday morning, when we were talking about names, did you believe it then? That it was going to work? The marriage, the life, all of it? She thought about it. She did not answer quickly, which he appreciated because a quick answer would not have been a real one. I wanted to believe it, she said. I think there's a version of the two of us that could have worked. If the circumstances had been different, if I'd been less willing to not see things, if you'd been paying different attention. She paused. But we weren't those versions. We were the versions we actually were, and the versions we actually were didn't work. She paused again. I stopped asking why a long time ago. The asking was making me sick. He nodded. What did you really want? She asked. Not what you told yourself you wanted. The real thing. He looked at her. You, he said. A life that made sense. Something to come home to that wasn't work. He paused. I'd never had that before. I didn't know how to hold it without tightening my grip, and when I tightened my grip, things broke, and I convinced myself the breaking was just the nature of things. He stopped. It wasn't. She looked at him. No, she said quietly. It wasn't. They sat in silence. Through the closed door, the sounds of the clinic. Somewhere on the floor below, a baby cried briefly and then stopped. The sudden, complete cessation that happens when a newborn is picked up and held. Both of them heard it. Neither of them acknowledged it. It was its own kind of acknowledgement. He left the foundation offices at 1:30 in the afternoon. Amara walked him to the entrance. Not through obligation, he could see that clearly, but because she chose to, in the way she had chosen all of it, with the quiet authority of a person who was operating entirely from her own interior compass, and had been for a long time. They stood at the entrance of the clinic. The street outside was alive in the particular midday way of Lagos. Noise and color and movement, and the smell of food from a cart somewhere nearby, and the heat pressing gently down from a white sky. The paperwork for the trust partnership, he said. I'll have it ready within 2 weeks. You'll want your legal team to review everything independently. Ngozi will handle it, she said. She's good. She's excellent. A brief, genuine smile. The first fully unguarded one he'd seen from her today. I found her through the hospital network in Abuja. She ran their entire operational department for 6 years. I believe it. They stood for a moment. Cassian, she said. Yes. She looked at him with that complete, clear-eyed expression. Take care of yourself. I mean it. Not as a formality. I mean, actually take care of yourself, whatever that requires. I know what it requires, he said. Do you? He thought about it honestly. I'm learning, he said. She nodded. That seemed like a sufficient answer. He extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment, and then, instead of taking it, she stepped forward and briefly, with the clean directness of someone doing the uncomplicated thing, put her hand on his arm. Not a hug. Not a prolonged moment. Just a hand on his arm for 4 seconds. That said everything that the conversation had been carefully not saying, that acknowledged the full weight of what they had both survived, and then she stepped back. Safe travels, she said. He looked at her one last time. The white coat. The close-cropped hair. The complete assembled person she had made herself into from the fragments of a night in December. Take care of the work, he said. I will, she said. That's the only thing I'm sure of. He walked out to the car. He did not look back. Not because he couldn't bear to, but because looking back was not the right movement for this moment. The right movement was forward, the same one she was making, the same one she had always been better at than him, and that he was now finally, after considerable cost, beginning to understand was not a talent some people had and others lacked, but a choice made daily, made deliberately, made even, especially, when it was the hardest available option. The car moved into traffic. The street closed around it. The building with the blue lettering above the door disappeared behind a corner. 3 years passed. The Enwosu Adeize Maternal Emergency Trust, the name they had finally agreed on in the paperwork, a compound that satisfied both the spirit of what he'd intended and Amara's insistence on her foundation's precedence, opened its first clinic in a rural district of Gangwon Province, South Korea, 14 months after his trip to Lagos. The second opened in the Philippines 8 months after that. By the time the third opened in rural Yunnan Province, the trust had trained over 600 community health workers in the hemorrhage risk protocol that Amara's team had developed in Ogun State, adapted for different resource contexts, and the number of high-risk transfers identified in the early window, rather than the late one, had produced a maternal survival improvement that earned a write-up in The Lancet. Amara was listed as lead clinical advisor. The trust was listed as funder. Cassian's name appeared nowhere in the materials, which was the arrangement he had specified and which Ngozi, now the trust co-director, enforced with the efficient precision that characterized everything she did. He read the Lancet article on a Tuesday morning in Hong Kong. in an apartment that was smaller than anything he'd lived in since his 20s, and that had a view of the harbor that he had not stopped finding remarkable in the year and 4 months he'd been there. He read it twice. He made himself a coffee. He put the journal down on the kitchen counter and stood looking at the harbor for a while. He emailed Ngozi. "Congratulations to the whole team. Please pass on my regards." He did not email Amara directly. They communicated through the Trust's administrative channels, professionally, about specific decisions that required his input, and those communications were correct and efficient and entirely appropriate. And he had accepted a long time ago that appropriate was the only register available to them now. And that appropriate was, in fact, enough. It was not nothing. That was the thing he had needed to learn and had learned and kept relearning in the way that important things require relearning at different levels of depth over time. The work was not nothing. The clinic in Gangwon was not nothing. The 600 community health workers were not nothing. The mother in Ogun State who had gone home with her healthy baby, that was not nothing. It did not restore what had been lost. It was never supposed to. It simply existed as something true and useful in the world that would not have existed if things had gone differently, and he had learned to hold that fact without trying to make it mean more than it meant. He had also, over the 3 years, stopped running the organization with the cold removed that had defined the first decade of his leadership. This was not a dramatic transformation. It happened in the small, mundane ways that actual change happens. A meeting where he stayed in the room after the agenda finished and asked his team what they actually thought, not what they thought he wanted to hear. A decision that he made slowly, consulting more people than usual, and revised twice before finalizing. A habit, slowly established, of answering his own phone. He had a therapist in Hong Kong. He had arrived at this fact through the same indirect route that men of his background and training usually arrived at it, through the slow accumulation of evidence that the alternative was not working. And he had sat in the small, comfortable office in mid-levels for almost 2 years now, and said things out loud that he had previously believed were the kind of things you kept in their containers and managed through productivity. The therapist was a small, calm woman named Dr. Chan, who did not appear to be impressed by him in any dimension, and asked questions with a mildness that consistently produced more interior disruption than any confrontation ever had. He had told her about Amara on the 3rd session and had been telling her about Amara, in one way or another, every session since. Jung Soo-yeon's trial concluded in the 2nd year. She was convicted on 3 counts: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and conduct contributing to the wrongful death of a fetus under Korean law. The sentence was 4 years, reduced on appeal to 2.5 with time served. Kashian attended neither the conviction nor the sentencing. He learned the outcomes from the family lawyer's texts. He read each text once and then continued with what he was doing. He visited his grandmother in Gyeonggi-do twice a year. They sat in the front room and she made tea and brought out the rice cakes, and they talked about the trust and about his work and about the garden, which the groundskeeper was maintaining with the same geometric precision as always. She did not mention his mother unless he brought it up, and he did not bring it up. She was 88, and her hands shook slightly when she poured the tea, and she was the only person from his previous life who still felt entirely familiar to him, the same weight in the same place, and he valued that in a way that he would not previously have known how to articulate. Celine he did not see. She had cooperated fully with the prosecution and had received a suspended sentence in recognition of that cooperation, and he understood from a peripheral awareness, he couldn't entirely switch off, moved abroad. He did not know where. He did not try to find out. What she had felt, she had said, was real. He believed her. It had not been enough for the purposes of the world, and she was living in whatever the consequences of that had made of her life, the same way he was living in the consequences of his. The 4th year began. In February, 4 years after he had flown to Lagos and sat in a white-painted office on a side street and watched a woman who had been his wife look at him with the clear, healed expression of someone for whom he was both fully real and entirely in the past. Amara's foundation opened its 20th clinic. The ceremony was in Kano, the 2nd city she had told him she was planning on the day he'd visited. The Lancet covered it. 3 international health organizations sent representatives. The Nigerian Minister of Health spoke. Photographs circulated of Amara at the ribbon cutting, surrounded by the clinic staff, laughing at something someone had said with the unguarded fullness of a person who is exactly where they intended to be. He saw the photographs because Ngozi sent them with a note. Thought you'd want to see the 20th. We made it happen. She had been saying we for about a year and a half now. He appreciated the we. He looked at the photographs for a long time. She looked different again. Not in the way of the gap between the person he'd known in Seoul and the person in the Lagos office. That gap had been enormous, the full distance of a transformation. This was subtler, the addition of something rather than the replacement of it. A depth in the expression that came from sustained work and sustained purpose, and the particular kind of quiet that accumulates in a person who has been doing the right thing for long enough that the rightness has become structural rather than effortful. She looked like herself, he thought, not a recovered version, not a rebuilt version, just herself. The most essential version of the person he had been given the enormous privilege of knowing and had handled with insufficient care, and who had taken that insufficient care and the loss that came with it, and done something with it that was, by any honest measure, extraordinary. He wrote to Ngozi, "Thank you for sending these. Please tell the whole team. Congratulations on 20." He closed his laptop. He walked out onto the balcony that overlooked the harbor. The February air in Hong Kong was cool and faintly humid, carrying the smell of salt and exhaust and something green from the hills beyond the city. The harbor was doing what it always did, moving, reflecting, working, indifferent and magnificent and continuous. A container ship was making its slow crossing from Kowloon. A smaller boat moved in the opposite direction, crossing the container ship's distant wake. He stood there for a while. He thought about the index card he had written in the car after the press conference, the single word on the back in his own handwriting. Nigeria. He still had it somewhere. He had moved it from pocket to pocket across 4 years and 3 countries and several apartments with the slightly absurd persistence of a man who cannot explain why he is keeping a thing and cannot bring himself to throw it away. He thought about what his grandfather had said. "I'm not building this so you can fix it. I'm building it so you know the full truth of what you were part of." He knew it. He had known it for 4 years, at increasing levels of granularity and depth, and knowing it had not fixed anything, as promised, and had made something possible that he did not have a clean name for. Not healing exactly, not resolution, but something in that territory. The ongoing work of being a person who understood what he had cost and had chosen, with that understanding fully in view, to become someone slightly less likely to cost the same thing again. Not a transformation, not an absolution, just the daily, unglamorous work of paying attention to the things that deserve to be paid attention to. The container ship had reached the midpoint of its crossing. The small boat was already at the far shore. He went back inside. He had a call in 20 minutes with the trust board about the 5th clinic site. He made himself another coffee. He sat at his desk. He opened the trust's operational report that Ngozi had sent 2 days ago and that he had been meaning to read and hadn't, and he began reading it from the beginning with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who had stopped believing that speed was the same thing as competence. The report was 32 pages. He read all of it. On page 17, in a section covering the Trust Community Health Worker Training Outcomes, there was a footnote that referenced the Ogun State pilot as the origin protocol. Amara's name was in the citation. He read the footnote and then continued to page 18. Outside the window, the harbor continued its indifferent, necessary movement. He turned the page. Late afternoon in Lagos, the light came in low and orange through the window of the office on the 2nd floor of the Foundation's Victoria Island headquarters. And Amara was at her desk reviewing patient intake data for the Kano Clinic when her phone buzzed with a message from Ngozi. Trust Board approved the 5th site. Cashin's team confirmed funding same day. She read the message. She set the phone down. She looked at the intake data for a moment. Then she looked out the window at the street below. The familiar afternoon motion of it, the vendors and the school children and the Okadas threading through gaps in traffic, the noise that had been the sound of her life for 4 years, and that she had stopped hearing the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. She thought briefly about a hospital corridor in Seoul, the fluorescent lights, the specific quality of a moment when the future rearranges itself irrevocably and you understand it is rearranging even as you move through it. She thought about Sunday mornings and rain and names spoken out loud for the first time. She thought about the woman she had been in her mother's house in the dark months and about the distance between that woman and the one sitting in this chair. Then she picked up her pen and wrote a note in the margin of the intake report. A small practical observation about the triage numbers from Kano that would need to be addressed in the next planning meeting, and she kept working. Through the clinic walls came the sound of the building in use, the efficient machinery of care, voices, and movement, and the ongoing ordinary business of people showing up to help other people through the most vulnerable hours of their lives. And on the floor below, carried faintly through the walls and the floors of the building she had made from loss, the sound of a newborn.